Hello everyone, and welcome to another ESET East Africa product webinar. Today we will be covering Endpoint Protector, our data loss prevention and mobile device management solution. We have done a webinar on this in the past, so if you've participated in our previous one, there might not be a lot of new information, but we will in future be covering another Endpoint Protector webinar where we actually do a bit more of a deep dive into specific areas. We obviously at the moment still just trying to ensure that all of our partners have as much information as possible, because for a lot of you, you may not have dealt with a DLP solution before, so obviously we're trying to spread that information. So before we begin, obviously just to highlight some of the concepts around data loss prevention. Obviously one of the obvious questions is what is data loss prevention? And essentially it's a way of putting measures in place on your network to prevent the flow of sensitive information to places that it's not supposed to go to. So one of the easy use cases would be to prevent the accidental dissemination of sensitive information via email to an external party, or preventing people from being able to copy sensitive information to something like a flash drive or an external hard drive, and then actually leaving the organization with that information. So we'll cover all of that in a bit more detail later on. So why would you need a DLP or an MDM solution? Well, as a first point, bring your own device obviously poses various unknown risks. There's obviously a growing and increasing trend around bringing your own device to an organization, and that can obviously pose various unknown risks, because you don't know what rogue or unwanted software the employees have on their smartphones and on their tablets, and as a result you might not know the risk that those software actually pose for the security of your company systems. Another point is obviously it goes hand in hand with the bringing your own device, is the increase in mobile workforce or remote employees. There's obviously a growing trend for various organizations and companies that there are more people that are working outside of an office or working almost exclusively at clients or at remote locations. So again, in controlling the flow of sensitive information from those machines, or implementing a management solution for those mobile devices, that's obviously a motivating factor for requiring DLP or MDM. Then again, it kind of goes hand in hand with the previous 2 points. If you have any misconfigured systems on your network and they are not enrolled in some type of DLP or MDM solution, you end up with a situation where those systems can go undetected. So you might not know about them, you might not know what's going on them. They may be used for some type of malicious purpose, they may be used for a purpose that they're simply not supposed to, whether or not that's intentional or not. But the point is that you may sit with a range of misconfigured systems that simply go undetected, so you don't know what risk they pose to your organization. Then, of course, there's the lack of security awareness on the part of users. As with any IT security solution out there, and obviously this applies to pretty much any organization anywhere in the world, the weakest link these days in any IT security plan, unfortunately, remains your users. People they may often click on links that they're not supposed to. They may open attachments or documents that they're not supposed to. They might be going to sites that they're not supposed to visit. Whether or not you block those or not, obviously not the issue, because especially with remote users, if they use a organization or company laptop outside of the office, they're obviously using some other type of internet connection, whether that be at a Wi-Fi hotspot or using a mobile connection or something like that. And obviously that then poses huge risks on the part of those users that lack security awareness. Then, of course, there's the factor of being compliant with local laws and regulations. Obviously, there are many laws and regulations in various countries. Most of them tend to be fairly similar. And essentially, if you need to be compliant with whatever regulations might be applicable to you, and you're found not to be compliant, obviously you can run into various fines and penalties as a result. And then the last point kind of goes along with the compliance point, is that in the event that there's some form of data breach, it can obviously cost the organization a large amount of funds. Not only does it cause problems for the organization because sensitive information is now in the hands of an unknown party, but it also means that aside from the actual costs of rectifying a data breach and the reduction in reputation for your organization or for your company, all of that can then be factored into additional fines and penalties as well. So it kind of becomes a snowball effect that you run into all sorts of issues. So what are some of the problems in implementing DLP solutions? Well, typically there's no universal solution for each and every network, but most limitations and challenges come from the size of a particular organization. And small organizations in particular generally have a single or an outsourced IT person or company. They may have limited IT knowledge or a limited IT background, and many of them have no experience with DLP solutions. Many DLP solutions out there also have a steep learning curve, so it means it's extremely difficult for organizations to adopt a new solution. Then most of the solutions out there don't offer a great deal of granularity or flexibility. Some of them are also not easily scalable, and in the case of a hardware appliance, those tend to have to be replaced altogether with a newer or larger model in order to cope with more users or to add new features. And few vendors come with some form of local support, and those that do often don't offer it efficiently, so support's definitely another problem with DLP. And nowadays, many organizations have a mixed environment with many different operating systems on their network. Most DLP vendors neglect Mac OS X and Linux platforms as their solutions tend to be built for Windows only. So how do we deal with all of these problems? Obviously, the solution is Endpoint Protector. So Casosis, the vendor behind Endpoint Protector, is based in Romania, and they've actually received numerous awards and certifications, and they happen to be trusted by some of the biggest companies in the world, including Aon, Sony, Philips, and a whole bunch of others. And as far as I know, Sony actually obtained Endpoint Protector after they suffered the massive breach of sensitive email being leaked to the public a couple of years ago. From a vendor perspective, Casosis is also open to feedback and requests, and they happily incorporate them into future releases, which means it's great to know that the vendor actually listens to feedback from users and from partners and distributors like ourselves. And we had them add classification rules for South African ID numbers, for example, because that was obviously a feature that we needed for local markets. Then it's actually the only vendor to offer true cross-platform functionality. So it actually works for Windows, Mac OS X, and Linux endpoints, which, as I mentioned, is very uncommon with other vendors. It basically comprises of a couple of components. The first is device control. Second is content-aware protection, and the last is mobile device management. So device control implies that you can have control over any physical device that you can connect to an endpoint, similar to the device control feature that is available for ESET endpoint products. So the idea there is that you can say whether or not flash drives are allowed, whether or not webcams are allowed, whether or not you can plug your cell phone into a laptop, for example, while it's at the office, whether or not external drives can be used, and so on. But aside from the ESET endpoint protection device control feature, with Endpoint Protector, on the other hand, it has an additional feature which is a trusted device framework. So it basically means that you can specify a removable storage device to have some form of encryption, whether it's software or hardware encryption, and then these removable storage devices can have a certain level of trusted device assigned to them. So it basically means that wherever you go, the encrypted devices are considered trusted because obviously the information on them is stored securely, whereas the other devices that any random person, any organization can bring to the office and maybe plug into an endpoint, those are deemed untrusted and will then be blocked. The content-aware protection feature is the actual inspection of content within files and your browser and your email and a whole bunch of other sets of software. And it basically allows you to set up policies to define what content is allowed to be transferred to what, such as blocking the upload of a spreadsheet with credit card information or ID numbers, and emailing that to a Gmail address or uploading it to a Dropbox account or something like that. Then the mobile device management feature obviously goes hand in hand with offering a complete DLP solution. As I'm sure everyone's aware nowadays, everyone is accessing their business email on a phone or a tablet, and obviously improving the security policies on these devices means that you significantly improve the security of your entire organization. So part of the features with the MDM solution is that you can ensure that people can't use a simple swipe to unlock on their smartphone, for example, by enforcing some type of password or PIN, and then also setting maybe a desired level of complexity for that password or PIN. You can also do things like blocking access to the camera on your phone while you are in the office building so that it can't be used to take photos or documents, but then have that unlocked again as soon as they leave the office, because it is obviously their own personal device, and then they can use the camera outside of the office location as an example. From a vendor perspective, they also provide a variety of pre-configured virtual machine templates that you just need to import into your respective hypervisor to get up and running. Support is offered by us as your local partner, and we obviously have direct contact with the Casosa support team and channel manager when necessary. The other major benefit of Endpoint Protector is that there's no significant training or certification required, because even though it is a DLP solution with incredibly granular configuration, it still has a very small learning curve, even for people with a limited IT background. Everything is extremely easy to deploy, configure, and maintain, obviously due to all of the points that I've mentioned before. It also is easily scalable without extensive IT personnel, resources, or unproductive downtime. From a pricing and licensing perspective, it is a product with perpetual licensing, but you only need to license what you need. So there's no additional services required, such as other servers or database licenses. And you effectively only license whether or not you need device control with content-aware protection, or if you need mobile device management. Maybe you only need mobile device management and you can license only that portion because that's all that you need to use. And obviously for all of these reasons, it fits anything from small organizations right up to large enterprises, because it's also a fraction of the price compared to the other vendors out there. And our major vendors in terms of competition include Symantec and McAfee DLP, and there's a couple of other vendors that we come up against, but these are by far the most major out of them all. So that pretty much wraps up the presentation aspect of this. Give me one quick moment and I'm going to switch to an actual demo of the Endpoint Protector software. Just give me one moment. So in front of you at the moment, you should see the Endpoint Protector dashboard. I'm not going to go into every single menu option in absolute detail, but it's obviously just to give you a good overview. From the dashboard, as you can see, you can get an idea of the number of endpoints and mobile devices on the network. You can see the most active users. You can see as all of the mobile devices that are part of your network, how many of those have some type of passcode applied, which don't, and which are currently unmanaged. As you can see on my network, there are no unmanaged, but there are a few that don't have passcodes set. You can also see a quick history of all of the last device control logs, and you can obviously go through each of these tabs in order to review or see some of the logs applying to each of those sections at a glance, rather than going to the reports and analysis section and digging into all of the logs in detail. And a few important things to note about Endpoint Protector is it obviously can synchronize with Active Directory so that you can import all of your users and groups, but it is also completely functional for a workgroup environment as well, so Active Directory is not a requirement. If you happen to import your Active Directory users and groups, what you'll be able to do is come to something like Endpoint Management, and you'll be able to see all of the users that you have on your network. I just need to log back into my control panel here quickly. So I can go to my users. Obviously, you can see that I've got a handful of users over here. I can go to groups. I've just got my test group over here. And I can basically edit this particular group, manage its settings, and effectively customize it however I want. I'm going to focus on the global settings in particular, just to show you a few things. First of all, you can configure Endpoint Protector either to be very restrictive as a global setting, meaning let's say you want to block flash drives and external hard drives and that type of thing. What you would do is maybe configure it to be very aggressive for everyone and only allow certain devices either on a group or a user or a computer level. You can also do the reverse of that, which a lot of organizations prefer, where the global settings are quite lax and they block things on a group or a user or a computer level. So you can do it in either direction depending on what works best for your organization. But the settings that we're looking at the moment is basically how you want the machines to act, which features should be enabled for the entire organization, and then some of the settings that are in place. So one of the important settings when you first deploy Endpoint Protector and you want to get as much visibility over your network as possible is by reducing the log interval count. So you see there that I've got mine configured as low as 1 minute. The default setting here happens to be once every half an hour, because obviously with a DLP solution, once you implement it, you want to get as much visibility as possible so that you can make sure that the policies and the configuration that you've put in place actually work correctly. So waiting for the endpoints to provide logs only once every half an hour will obviously slow you down. So that's why reducing the log interval is very important, because it means that you can get that information as quickly as possible so that you can make some changes on the fly and get it working properly. There's a few other settings that are important here. Obviously, there's a file shadowing facility available in Endpoint Protector as well. But what the file shadowing does is, let's say I am working with a document that contains a bunch of credit card information. Because I've deemed that credit card information is sensitive to my organization, what I've done is I've then enabled the file shadowing facility so that if I try to email that document out to, let's say, my personal Gmail account, as an example, that transfer will be flagged, and then a copy will be made of that file. So the administrators can then maybe configure an alert so they can receive an email notification that someone's tried to email a document containing sensitive information outside of the organization. And then the administrators or the department heads can come into the system, review the logs, and they can actually get an entire copy of the document that was maybe attached or sent online. And they can then open that document and review it to determine if it was a legitimate transfer or not. Maybe they need to speak to the person that tried to send it. Maybe they simply didn't know that they weren't supposed to send it there, or they were actually trying to get some sensitive information out of the organization when they're not supposed to. So a lot of these settings have a big impact when you first implement the solution, and that's also why there's things like the shadow interval. So how often do you want to send shadow copies to the server? How big are the shadows or the shadow volume that should be kept? And then the minimum and the maximum sizes for the shadowing to take place. So in my case, what will happen is, as long as the file is less than 4 megabytes, a copy will be made and it will be sent to the server. Whereas anything larger than 4 megabytes in this particular case would not be copied, but it will still monitor and flag that a file was sent out that may have contained sensitive information. So the nice thing about this is all of these settings that you see, in this case, this is obviously the global settings, but you can customize it for a group, or you can customize it for a particular computer or endpoint. So as you can see, that you can be incredibly granular, and you can obviously customize it for a specific department or for a specific computer, maybe a reception machine or an accounts machine or something like that. Then from an endpoint's rights perspective, I'm just going to show you the global rights because it's the easiest to explain. As you can see, this is how you would define the device control settings. So you can see that most of the devices will be blocked. So if someone tries to plug in a USB storage device, it will actually prompt an access denied error in Windows, for example, if they try to access it. What I am allowing is internal CD or DVD writers. I am also allowing Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. I'm also allowing keyboards and USB modems as well as network shares, but obviously everything else is blocked. Then, as I mentioned in the presentation, you can configure removable storage devices for as trusted devices if they've got some measure of encryption on them, which is why if I go to the USB devices, you can say that it should only be allowed if the trusted device is trusted device level 1, 2, 3, or 4. The level of trusted device is basically determined by the level of encryption. So software encryption is considered trusted device level 1, whereas something with, say, a military grade or FIPS compliant hardware encryption module would be trusted device level 4, for example. So yes, the higher the number, the higher the level of encryption, essentially. And if I wanted to customize these settings for a particular group, I can go to my group, I can go and edit the test group that I created here, and I can either preserve the global setting, which means that most of the things will be blocked and only allowed that which I have allowed on the global setting, or I can override it by allowing or denying it instead of preserving the global setting. So that's why I mentioned from a global perspective, you can either be very restrictive and block things on a group, and allow things on a group or a computer or a user level, or you can be very lax and then block things on a group and a computer and a user level. So that's all fairly straightforward. The next thing that I want to cover is the content-aware protection policies. So I'm just going to go here and open one of the test policies that I've got in place. This happens to be a Windows policy. You would need to create separate policies for each of the operating system environments that you have on your network, because obviously each policy is limited to the software that is available on the operating system that you've selected, which is why if I go and create a Mac OS X policy, it'll have all the Mac software that's supported. And if I create a Linux policy, it'll have all the Linux software that I've got supported in each of these sections. So what this policy does, just to explain you how it is configured, I have some pre-configured or predefined content that I am looking for. This policy will prevent the transfer of that information and log it. Now, when you first implement something like a DLP solution, it would be very important to configure your policies in report-only mode. The idea there is that you get visibility over the sensitive information that people are trying to transfer as opposed to blocking them, because the last thing that you want is that people are going about their day-to-day work, IT and the management and security staff implement something like a DLP solution, and all of a sudden the staff can't go about their normal day-to-day work, purely because maybe a policy has been misconfigured or something like that, which is why you would use the report-only mode so that you can make sure that the logs that are being generated are correct and that you're not generating too many false positives, because the false positives in the block and report mode would mean that that action is blocked by the user. Next, you can also opt to hide the content-aware protection client notifications. So if I was to try and send a file out that would be blocked, a little pop-up will show up in my system tray to say, hey, you have tried to send this file. It has been blocked by a policy. Please contact your administrator, for example. Maybe you want to hide those notifications, so you can do that by simply ticking the box. This policy is obviously enabled, and what you can also do is you can configure a threshold. So the nice thing about the threshold is, let's say you have an accounts department. Now, an accounts department is obviously expected to deal with lots of financial information and bank account numbers and maybe credit card information and so on. So it would be quite normal for an accounts department to maybe have a file with many instances of credit card numbers. However, something like a support department, it would be very unusual for them to deal with many instances of that type of information in one document. So what you can do is configure a threshold of, let's say, 2 or 3, so that in the event that this policy is applied to support, for example, as soon as they have more than one instance of, say, a credit card number, then you can either log the information or block and report that information. Whereas as long as it's only one instance, for example, then it's fine, because that is expected behavior for that particular department or for that user, and so on. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at controlled storage device types, so that's anything like flash drives, external hard drives, optical drives, and so on. I'm also monitoring the clipboard so that people can copy and paste sensitive information potentially. I'm disabling the ability to take a screenshot. And then you can optionally scan network shares, and you can monitor information that's being sent to printers and a whole bunch of other things as well. What I'm also doing is I'm looking at information being sent to a few common web browsers, to a few email clients. You can set it to look for instant messaging applications like Skype and Google Talk or Hangouts and Pigeon and a whole bunch of others. You can also monitor all manner of cloud services and file sharing applications like Google Drive and Dropbox and a whole bunch of others. And you can also look for social media and other miscellaneous sets of software, like the software that comes with your phone and iTunes and TeamViewer and WinSCP clients and such things. What I'm doing with this policy is I'm not necessarily looking for specific file types. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm looking at all file types, but I'm looking for predefined content. So I'm looking for things like credit card information. I'm looking for personal information like ID numbers, email addresses, addresses, and that type of thing. And in the event that you need to flag information that is not available in this predefined content filter, all of these tick boxes that you see in front of you at the moment, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't block or control it. All that you need to do is go and define your own custom content filter. So you basically need to determine what words you are looking for. Maybe it's a specific word that's applicable to your company or organization, or if it's a variable. One of the easy use cases that I have is, let's say it's an insurance company. They might have a very specific format for their policy number. So it might have a certain number of digits always, and it might have maybe a combination of letters and numbers and so on. So what you can do is, if anything is not defined in the predefined content filter, you can either define the words that need to be used to find and block that information, or you can write regular expressions to match that information when it's a variable like a policy number, which doesn't always look exactly the same. So basically the point in explaining all of this is that over and above the predefined content filter, that means that you can add your own words and your own regular expressions to match any other type of sensitive information which may be applicable to your organization. So as I mentioned, policy numbers for an insurance company is an easy example. Another example would be something like exam numbers for a university. So you can look for all of the exam numbers on documents in order to control the flow of that information. Then you can also add a few whitelist entries. So maybe there's a specific domain that people send email to, maybe your own domain or maybe a sister company that you work with, and you obviously don't want to control the flow of information to those email addresses. So you can basically define a email domain whitelist, and it basically means that any mail sent to that domain would not be subject to the content aware protection policy. So it basically means that you set everything up in terms of the information that you're looking for, and then you whitelist those that you don't need to monitor because everything else should be monitored because it is potentially untrusted, right? Then before I dive into mobile device management and a few other things, another feature with the device control and the content-aware protection is the ability to use a offline temporary password, right? So the idea is, let's say there's a user that is normally in the office, they go out to a customer, and now they need to maybe access some sensitive information or send some sensitive information to the customer, but they can't because you've got a policy that blocks that, right? So what you can do is you can come here and you can basically choose the machine in question on your network, and you can generate an offline temporary password. So that can then either unlock the content-aware protection policies for that device, anything from 30 minutes right up to 30 days, or you can allow specific devices to be used. So let's say you block flash drives under normal circumstances. Now you select the machine, you generate the offline temporary password, the user types that into their machine on their side, even though they might not have internet connectivity and they're out at a remote location, and then for the time frame that you've specified, those devices will be unlocked, or that content-aware protection policy can then be bypassed. And as soon as that token expires, all of the normal policies go into effect again. So this is basically two use cases. The first of which is obviously if someone's out remotely and they don't have internet access, or the other one is simply because it would be silly to reduce the security of your organization by changing a policy where you can just as easily generate an offline temporary password only for that specific computer and still maintain the same level of security for the rest of your organization. Then, of course, there's various reports and other alerts options available in Endpoint Protector. So if I just quickly go to the logs report, this will basically just show all of the Active Directory synchronization tasks and when last some of my machines received updates to the policies that I've got in place. So this log is fairly general and it doesn't show very unique information. What I would rather focus on is the content-aware report. So I'm quickly going to go back here to the simulations that I ran actually very early last year already. And basically what I've got here is in these samples at the bottom, what I've done is I've taken something like the sample pictures on a Windows 7 machine, and I tried to upload them using Chrome as my web browser to an online file sharing portal. And that activity was then blocked. What I then later did is I created a Word document that contains some credit card information, and I also tried to upload it using Chrome as my browser to an online file sharing portal, and that activity was then blocked. What I did later then is I enabled the file shadowing facility, and I made a new credit card document, and I then also put credit card information in it and tried to upload it. And that's why when I enabled file shadowing, that's why there's the little save icon in the top, in the right-hand side. So I can basically click on the icon, download a copy of that Word document, and see all of the information because it flagged that there was credit card numbers in it. And then as you can see, these just happen to be all sorts of bits of information that I had copied or tried to paste at some point, which is why it was flagged as the clipboard. So that is as a result of me monitoring the clipboard for all of the information types that I have specified in the content-aware protection policy, which is why you're seeing things like dates and email addresses and phone numbers and so on. So this gives you an idea of the strength of the tool and how accurate it can be in terms of identifying all sorts of sensitive information, no matter where they are being used. Then, of course, it's very important to keep an eye on your administrators. Obviously, the administrator of something like a DLP solution tends to have access to a lot of sensitive information. So it's important to keep an eye on what your administrators are doing. So you can see all of the admin actions. So if I quickly go over here, You can see that I've been signing in. This was obviously just before the demo today. You can obviously also see when policies were changed. That was my colleague that was logged in over there, and he obviously signed in at some point. So this is basically a full history log of every single bit of activity that transpired through the part of your administrators. Then there's also a few other useful areas here, like seeing the computer or the user history. So I can go into something like a user history. I can select, say, my user over there, and I'll be able to see a full log of all of the actions that that user has had for as long as he's been active on the network. Then part of the idea in implementing a DLP solution is that once you've got all of the policies in place, you shouldn't be spending your time looking at these control panels every day, right? The idea is that you set it up and that you configure your alerts to inform you via email once a policy is triggered. That way, then you log into the web interface and you come and investigate if that was a legitimate issue and it needs maybe some type of internal process to be actioned on your side, or if it was actually just a false positive and it can be ignored, right? So the point is, once you've got it configured and it's working nicely and it's generating the information that you need, that you actually configure email alerts so that you don't spend your time looking at this dashboard the whole time. Then, to give you a quick idea of the device types that are supported by Endpoint Protector, so this gives you an idea of all of the devices that I can control, and it gives you an idea of on what you can control on each of the 3 different platforms that are supported. So obviously Windows is by far the most supported platform, and then Mac OS X and Linux obviously following. But as you can see, you can control everything ranging from Bluetooth devices, USB storage devices, card readers, Wi-Fi adapters, keyboards, webcams, pretty much anything that you can think of. Then there's the content-aware protection module. So as I mentioned, that's to control the flow of sensitive information. It needs to be pointed out that this particular section needs an update from the vendor. They just released content-aware protection for Linux, which is why in the slideshow presentation I highlighted that it's one of the only truly cross-platform solutions out there, and that's because they just released content-aware protection for Linux as well. So that's great. The next point is mobile device management. So I'm just opening that up quickly. So as you can see, I've only got Android devices on my network. And you can obviously see when last certain devices were connected and so on. I'm basically going to focus on my current device. So I'm just going to my device over here. So firstly, you can see where it is. So I'm obviously sitting at our office here in Rondebosch in Cape Town at the moment. You can see the operating system. You can see the model number of the phone. You can see the version of the operating system that it's using. You can see the IMEI device number. That's obviously incredibly useful because let's say a device gets stolen. Now you can quickly obtain the IMEI device number and report it with the authorities and report it with the network provider and actually have that device blocked. Then a couple of things that you can do. I can obviously enforce a particular security policy, as I mentioned. So I can enforce the use of a certain complexity of passwords so that it's not a simple swipe to unlock, as an example. I can set a specific password as opposed to letting the user choose one themselves. I can enforce device encryption so that if the device gets stolen and someone uses a brute force method or flashes the ROM on an Android device, for example, they still can't get access to any old local storage. I can also remotely lock or wipe the device. So let's say a device is stolen or lost. You can wipe it to ensure that none of the information that might be on it can get into the hands of someone who's not supposed to have it. I can block the use of the Wi-Fi adapter, the Bluetooth adapter, as well as the camera on the mobile device. And then another nice aspect of the mobile device management facility is there's a small difference between iOS devices and Android devices. On Android devices, you can remotely push Wi-Fi settings for your organization. Whereas on Apple or iOS devices, you can push Wi-Fi settings as well as exchange email settings. So the nice thing about these functions is it means that when a new employee joins the company, or if an employee obtains and buys a new mobile phone or a new tablet, all you have to do is put the Endpoint Protector agent on it and enroll it into your MDM solution. From that point, you can remotely push their Wi-Fi and potentially their email settings as well. So it means it's that little bit quicker for you as an administrator to get a new device added to the network and functioning correctly, as opposed to relying on a user to potentially try and input their email settings, which I'm sure many of you have encountered. People constantly put the settings in incorrectly. Then what I can do is, obviously this is customizing it for my mobile device in particular. You can also create an MDM policy to apply that to a range of devices all at once. And then there's also a very useful feature called geofencing. All right, so I'm just going to open my little geofence that I've got here at the moment. So you should be able to see that there's some black lines drawn around a building, and that building happens to be our office in Cape Town. So what I can do is I can apply specific security settings for mobile devices when they are in this location. So one of the examples is I can say that when you're in this location, you can't use the camera on your phone, for example. Or when you're in this location, you can't use Wi-Fi, or you can't use Bluetooth, or something like that. Now, the obvious use case there with the camera functionality is it means that when they're in the office, they can't necessarily take photos of the inside of the building, maybe for security reasons. They can't take photos of maybe sensitive information that's on screens or on a boardroom or anything like that, or documents that are inside the office. So that's essentially what you can do with the geofencing module. The other thing is you can also add a list of authorized applications, and you can also add contacts. So it basically means that when an employee joins the organization and you enroll their mobile device onto the system, they immediately have access to all of the contact information for the employees at that company. So you don't need to have them add every single contact manually onto their mobile phones. And then, of course, once the device leaves the organization, they still have that information handy. So that essentially wraps up the webinar for today. I'm going to take a couple of moments to answer any questions that may have come up. So let me just read through some of these questions so that I can answer them correctly. Just hold on a couple of moments. So one question is that there's an understanding of the file shadowing feature. It captures a flagged file, but can you set a rule for that file not to be sent in the first place? Absolutely, and that's where the report only or the block and report function in the content aware protection policy is that I showed you. So if I quickly go back to my policies again, I'm opening up my one policy that I've got in place. This one blocks and reports. So what it'll do is if I try to send that document containing credit card information in my example, it will report that I've tried to do that, and it'll block the transfer in the first place. Whereas alternatively, you could have configured it so that it only reports it, but then you can still go and view the file shadow to see if it was of concern or not. So yes, you can definitely do that. Another question is, how do you deploy Endpoint Protector to bring your own device? And just wondering how feasible it is to a company, since these are personal assets. So the main thing is that would be determined by the organization in question, right? So you, as a company, you would basically have a company policy that says that when you work here, because of the fact that you will be accessing corporate email on your device, you have to have the mobile device management agent on your phone. If you don't want that mobile device management agent on your phone, then you simply don't get access to corporate email. So it would basically be a feasibility assessment for the organization. They need to put the policies in place to determine what is allowed and what isn't. And in terms of how you actually deploy it, the deployment process is very straightforward. I'll go to the enroll devices over here. There's a couple of ways that you can do it. So firstly, you can send an email request to the user with a link that they need to access, which will take them to the Play Store or to the Apple Store to download the application. Or you can send an SMS with exactly the same information, or you can visit a particular URL on the device in particular, or you can scan the QR code that's shown on screen for the relevant operating system. So I hope that answers the question. I'm just waiting to see if any other questions might come through. I'll give you guys a couple of moments. Okay, so there's another question. Since it's a user's device, can't they easily uninstall and take a quick snap and install it later? The answer to that is no, because what you can do is you can set a security policy that requires the user to input a password before they can uninstall. Secondly, I need to point out that that applies to the agent that's installed on endpoints like Windows and OS X and Linux machines. For the mobile device management, what will happen is as soon as someone goes and uninstalls the application, you can also receive an alert that will be shown on the dashboard and can optionally be sent via email as well. So you'll be informed of the fact that the user tried to uninstall or did uninstall the application. So you then have an idea that they obviously did that. And then secondly, when they install it again, they actually need to provide a one-time code in order to reinstall it. So if they uninstall it and they need to reinstall it, you as the administrator would need to provide them with a new one-time code because the original one that they had would no longer be valid. So there are obviously controls around that to prevent the user from trying to trick the system. So that's not a concern. I'm just waiting a bit longer to see if any other questions come through. I'm waiting a bit longer to see if any other questions come through. We obviously still have a bit of time left. So if anyone has any questions, please send them through. Not a question. I'm just getting a comment. Someone saying that it's a powerful security tool and they like it. That's good feedback. Obviously, we look at so many different products on the market out there, and we basically decided on Endpoint Protected because of the feature set and because of how easy it is to actually use. And I'm sure, or at least I hope, that during this session, everyone got an idea of how easy it actually is to manage based on what I've shown you. With regards to the pricing model, another question is, as I mentioned in the presentation, it is a perpetual license. but you license what you need. So if you only want to use the mobile device management for Android or iOS devices, then you only get MDM licenses. If, however, you want the content-aware protection and the device control, then you buy the licenses for those features for the number of endpoints. So it's basically per endpoint, and it's a perpetual or annual license model. I will point out that we have been communicating with Casosis, the software vendor that I mentioned in the beginning of the presentation, to see if at some point in the future, like with ESET, we may be able to provide a MSP or monthly pricing option as well. But we will obviously communicate that to our partners if and when it becomes available for it. So at the moment, it's perpetual and annual licensing only. So I'm just waiting to see if any other last questions come through. We've got about 2 or 3 minutes left of the session. If there's any questions, please send them through.
You'll be on either way. This is up to you. The webinar over. You need to still record it.
Right, so it doesn't look like any other questions are coming through. So that basically wraps it up for today. I hope everyone that attended found it informative. If you have any questions, please send them through. You can obviously email us on partners@esetafrica.com or support@esetafrica.com if you've got any technical queries or anything like that. There are trials available, so if you go to our wiki, if you have not yet registered, please do so. You can go to wiki.esetafrica.com in your browser. If you haven't registered yet, you need to register using your partner ID so that we can verify that you are an actual partner. Then once you've got access, you'll actually be able to obtain a licensing questionnaire as well as trial information. So we give you instructions on how you can obtain a trial, as well as a breakdown on the types of questions that you would need to answer or have answers for in order to determine the licensing requirements for Endpoint Protector. And that's in addition to various data sheets and other video presentations, and we'll also be uploading this today's webinar after today's session up to the wiki as well, so anyone that's missed it or need to review anything can go through it again and watch it again. So that basically wraps it all up. Thank you very much everyone for attending, and have a good day.